Welcome to another segment of provocative conversations destined to provoke further thought and spark greater questions regarding God, church, and the religious establishments of both the past and the present. I am the proud heretic, Mr. Provocateur himself. Hello, I am the proud heretic, Mr. Provocateur himself. I'm going to go back a little bit to bring us back up to speed, and we'll just blend right on in. God stated to me just before July the 2nd, he stated to me that church structure cannot heal the world's issues. We've come to understand that, and even though many or the church has not come to appreciate that or even acknowledge that, or even if they do acknowledge it, they still fail to acknowledge it by the way that they just continue on with things as normal and still think that they can continue to do as they've always done. But the church cannot do as they've continued to do prior to this pandemic period. The church, again, has lost its ability to make a difference in the world. The church, even though it's living on its past history, its past dispensational period in history, the church has no furtherance of history. The church has nowhere else to go but away. The church will never accept its own failures, its own OWN ending. The church will fight until the end, just like Donald Trump. As goes Donald Trump, as goes the church, as I've stated before. But we'll get to that. God says church structure cannot heal the world's issues. The church's structure was not designed to deal with the structural issues of our societies. The church never structured itself in a way to actually heal or deal with the structural issues of our societies. Yes, individuals have come about and tried to do some things, but the church structure was never designed within its boundaries to even do what even those individuals may have very well and may very well desire to do. Those individuals, if they get anything done, it's because they worked outside of the structure of the church, outside of the systemic rules and guidelines and traditions of the church, because there's no way that you're going to work within the rules and guidelines of the systemic workings of the church and yet produce the change that our society needs. The structured systems within our societies were never designed to bring structure or change to our communities based upon the broken structural system of the church. Again, the relevancy of the church is in its ability to influence, in its ability to bring about change. And without its ability to influence and bring about change, the church has no relevance. Without its ability to bring about change, the church has no influential ability to penetrate into the issues of our society. Without the ability to penetrate, the church has no reach ability, which is why the church is not reaching. Even though the church lost its relevant potency long ago, the church has nevertheless maintained its structural relevance for centuries. In other words, even though the church had lost its potency, the church still maintained its structural relevance for centuries. People always found the need to the religious structure, the religious order, the religious tradition of the church. They've always run to the structure of the church when it came to them having issues, or when it came to them wanting to get married or christen a child, or whatever other reason that you would go to a church for. They always found the church always maintained a structural relevance, even though the potency of its relevance was no longer. It was almost like Samson and Delilah. Samson had already had his hair cut off by Delilah, and his power was in his hair, or rather in him obeying his particular group of people that they should not cut their hair. His hair was cut off by her. He didn't know it, and he woke up as usual and tried to do what he usually did with his strength, and he didn't even realize that his strength had left him. Well, the church is that way. They don't realize that their strength has left them. Saul was still trying to reign as king after his 20 years. Another 20 years, he was trying to do things, and things weren't working for him because he was already rejected and he didn't realize it. The church right now is in an hour in this pandemic period where the church is trying to bring forth a strength, a potency, a relevance, an influence that the church no longer possesses. The church does not realize that its dispensational era, the dispensational era of the church has come to its close. The structural church no longer has relevance. The potency of the structured church no longer exists. Sure, there is still light within the church, but the light of the church is no longer effective. The light that is within the church is no longer affecting or effecting. The darkness that surrounds the communities of our church houses has overshadowed the little light that is within certain members of the so-called church, which has caused those within the church houses, within our communities, to be ineffective in dealing with the social issues of race and racism. The little light there is within the church house is overpowered by the prevailing darkness of the church itself, the entity itself, the individuals themselves. The church is ineffective in dealing with the ills of the world. For the darkness that surrounds the church within the communities of the church is due to the darkness within the church. Again, the darkness that surrounds the church within the communities of the church. You know, the darkness that surrounds the church, and that darkness that surrounds the church speaks of all the issues that are within the communities that churches are placed or built. You know, within a community, you will have 50 churches, 100 churches within one community. But the darkness of the community has surrounded the darkness of the church. But the darkness of the communities that surround the church is due to the darkness that is within the church itself. The very darkness that has invaded the church is the very darkness that has invaded the world. Wow. The very darkness that has invaded the church is the very darkness that has invaded the world. Notice it didn't say I didn't say the very darkness that invaded the world is the very darkness that invaded the church. No, the church wants you to think that if there are issues in the church, it's not because of the church, but it's because of the church behaving like the world. That's not what God said to me. God said to me, the very darkness that has invaded the world is the very darkness that has invaded the church, because the very darkness that has invaded the world came through the church. The church was here before all of this other stuff, even though people don't want to think so. But one of the head people within the church realm itself, Kenneth Copeland, stated that Christian people came to this divided states of America, killed the Indians up. And he didn't say that part, but I'm saying that part, came to this divided states of America and brought Christianity here and brought the Bible here and established everything upon the Bible. Well, if everything was established upon the Bible, then guess what? The Bible is the one, and the church, they are the ones who set up the systems that be. And the systems that be was set up by so-called Christians, church folk with a book that enabled them to enslave a whole race of people, multiple races of people, even some of their own. Not only enslave them, but rape them and kill them. And we want to say these were godly men and women of God. Are you on crack? The very darkness that has invaded the church is the very darkness that has invaded the world. Because, see, remember, the church is the one carrying the virus. The church is the one that's carrying the infection. Remember, the church infiltrated itself into the White House. Now the White House and the church are carrying the virus, spiritually and physically. The darkness of the church is the darkness of the world, not the other way around. The darkness that is within the church speaks of the darkness that is within the communities of the church or surrounding the church, including the darkness of racism. Wow. Without influence, the church has no relevance. Without relevance, the church has no ability to bring about change. The church has lost its appeal. The church is no longer appealing. The church has lost its significance. The church has lost its societal influence. These are the things God told me. People no longer see or sense the relevance of the church. No wonder these other generations of people are no longer interested in going to church. And then those who even grew up in the church no longer have an appetite or desire or can stomach being with the church. People are no longer sensing the relevancy or the need of the church or of church as a whole. People are no longer willing to go into the closed society of the church or its church houses. The church is fighting for the position that it no longer has the relevancy to fulfill. The church is still fighting to get back to its position, still fighting to maintain relevance, to maintain its influence when it no longer has the relevancy, the ability to fulfill. You can't even fulfill the position you're in because you don't have the relevancy that you would need in order to fill the position that you were once in, church. The church is fighting for the position that it no longer holds. The church has lost its relevance and is now fighting for its position without having its dispensational influence. You no longer have a dispensational influence, church, because the dispensation of your era has come to an end. So now we come over into July the 2nd, where God was speaking to me, and he spoke to me twice on July the 2nd. This is the first time he spoke to me, and I will speak for some of the things that he stated to me. Church, I'm speaking this toward you, though I spoke some of this once before in some of the one of the or two of the other recordings. I have to speak this toward the church, and the church need to understand this because you are not exempt from this season. God says that no one will be exempt from this season. So that means you too, church. And what God said to me is that the season that you're in is a woeful season. Church, the season that you're in is a woeful season. This is a woeful season that you are in. You are in the midst of a woeful season. This season is filled with woeful, WOEFUL, a period full of woes. events. Woeful events will occur throughout the season. Woeful events will fill this season. And church, that isn't just for the world. That's for you, as though you are something better than the world. You are not of the world. Yeah. Well, why do you lie like the world? Why do you look like the world? Why do you vote like the world? Huh? Why do you look like Donald Trump? Why do you behave like him? Why do you hate like him? There will be woeful events that cannot be measured. The woeful events of this season will not be able to be measured during this season. Hear that, church. This season will bring catastrophe, devastation. Listen, God says, and this is not the end. This is not the so-called end. Yeah, it's just the rapture. God said, this is not the end. This is greater than what the end is told to be. This is greater than what has been foretold regarding the end. Listen, God says, do not get caught up on the end of things. Do not get caught up on the so-called end of things, because this is not the end of things. This is not where things will end. He says, but things will end. See, this is not where things will end and the world will be raptured and all this other crazy stuff. But this is where things will end. And one of the things that will end, church, is your reign, the need for you. That's why you're not in the shift. That's why you're not in agreement with the shift. That's why you're not in the flow. That's why you're not in agreement with the flow. That's why you're not flowing with the shift. That's why the shift is flowing right over you. God said to me, the church will stand by at what is going on in this season, and the shift will occur. And he says that the shift will pass right over the church, and the church won't even realize it. And when it's over, the church will ask, what just happened? The church will be left standing asking each other, what just happened? You will only see it, church, after it has happened, because you're just that blind, says God. Do not get caught up on the end of things. However, know that things will come to an abrupt end during this season. You saw how those church doors began to close abruptly around the world. Well, church, there it is. It's happening. This season will end many things. Many things will come to an abrupt end during this season. This season will put an end to many things. No longer will things continue to be as they have been, church. Many things that once were will no longer be, church. Many things that were once permitted will no longer be permitted, church. No longer will people permit what they once permitted. People are not going to deal with you anymore, church. People will not permit what they once permitted. Listen, church, God says people have grown weary. They've grown weary in letting things be as they were. People are awakening to the truth now. People are awakening to the truth of what it's supposed to be. People's reality is dawning on them. People are awakening to their own reality. People are awakening to the truth of how things are supposed to be. This is a season where people's eyes will be open, a season where people will begin to see clearly. This is a season where people will see clearly. This is the season where people will see. Listen, hearing is going to be an important aspect of this season. This is a season that's full of hearing, filled with hearing. The need to hear during this season will drive people. This season is filled with people's need for hearing, and they'll be driven to hear. But it just won't be any type hearing. No longer, church, will you be able to sing on the mic and hum your way through and play the organ and whatever else, whatever other musical instrument in order to woo the people. I call it what would you call that? I call it a snake charm. There's a snake charm that goes on in the church, and it's more like, like every church has its form of snake charm. For the black church, it's generally the organ, maybe the drum, could be a guitar as well, and whatever other instrument. Those are snake charms. Well, that's not going to happen anymore. No longer, church, will you be able to like sprinkle a magic jingle over the people, and somehow you mesmerize them, and you pull them in, and you bring them where you want to bring them, and then you fleece them, you rape them physically, you rape them mentally, you rape them socially, and you rape them intellectually. And of course, you snatch all of their money out of them, so you rape them financially with all of your little snake charms. Yes. And then all of your magic jingles, all of your little jingles. Yes, yes, yes. That's coming to an end, church. You're not going to be able to do that anymore. God says, listen, this season is filled with people's need to hear, and they're going to be driven to hear. They'll have a strong need to hear throughout this season, but the hearing that they're going to want is going to have to be substance. He said, currently, the world isn't hearing. Currently, the world is not trying to hear, and the church isn't trying to hear. Currently, the world is not wanting to hear. So some of the people are still going with what you're doing, church, but don't worry. God says people's desire to hear will be great. And even though the world is not desiring to hear right now, they will. He says there'll come a point in this season where they will hear. He said the people will come to a point in this season where their desire to hear will be great. He says, this season will create a desire, and that desire to hear is going to be a desire to hear what is true. People are going to desire to hear what is of substance. They will desire to hear substance of truth. He says there will be a great demand upon people who hold the truth. The substance of truth. And if you don't hold truth, church, it won't be you who they'll come to. So you might as well keep closing your doors and stop all the fighting, because you're kicking against the pricks. The substance of truth will be of great demand. Those who have truth will be of great demand. The days of little or no substance will no longer be accepted. People will no longer accept the days of little or no substance. You're going to have substance from this point on, church. People will no longer feed upon things that are of no substance. This season will place a demand upon people's substance, upon people to deliver substance. Substance will be demanded of those who speak during this season. Well, that takes away the church, because you don't have substance. For people will no longer settle for things of little or no substance. Substance will be a requirement of this season. And those who speak during this season must possess substance. Well, there goes the church. Those who speak during this season must come forth with substance. This season will uncover the secret ones of this season because of that demand for substance. The secret ones, the hidden ones. People who possess substance will come forth in this season. Those people with substance will begin to come forth from obscure places. People who have been hidden from the public will begin to come forth throughout this season, God says. Those who have been silent are going to speak forth in this season. Those who have been silent are going to speak forth what they are hearing. They are going to speak forth the things that they have heard. Those who are going to speak forth what they have heard in this season will not speak forth words that they have heard from in the earth. The things that will come forth will not be things that were conjured up by people. No, those who are going to speak forth what they have heard in this season will not speak forth words that they have heard from the earth realm. These will be words that they heard from within them, from within their spirit, from within the depths of their flowing, in the depths of their God-given wells of life. The words that the people of this season will speak forth will be words that will flow from within them. These speakers of this season will flow with revelation from within them. These people will flow with revelation that will flow within and from within their spirit. They will begin to speak revelation that is being poured into them. The words that will come forth from the people that I am sending, God says, that I am sending forth to speak, will not be the words of men. No longer will they regurgitate. No longer will they speak recycled words, recycled messages. No longer will they tell lies across the pulpits, lies that they made up. No longer will you be able to fill the hearts and minds of the people with mess. Their words will not be words of enticing men to entice people to get up off of their money and their substance and even their bodies. God says these people who are coming forth, their words will be words that are being spoken forth from within them. Their words will contain substance. Their words will produce substance. Their words will produce life-altering substance. That's what the church does not have, life-altering substance. God says, I am uprooting the systems of this world. He says the systems of this world are being uprooted. Guess what the church is? A system of this world. He said the systems of this world are being uprooted. I am uprooting the systems of this world that have worked havoc in the lives of the people. The church system has worked havoc in the lives of people. The church system has caused people to commit suicide, and the church loved it so. The church just wrote them off and said, oh, well, another one bites the dust. No longer will that be, says God. I am uprooting the systems that have enslaved the people. I am removing every system. That's the church system. You have enslaved the people. Slaves, obey your master. There's no authority that was not set up by God. Slaves, if you are a slave, you better not seek to be loose. Pray for your masters. Yeah, pray for them, huh? I am removing every system that is not working for the good of the people. That's what God said to me. I am dismantling every system that is not for the people. God says the people have continued to demand the ways of old. The people have continued to demand the ways of old. Look at you, church. Look at you right now. Look at you in the midst of this pandemic. Look at you 8 months into this pandemic. Look how you are still demanding the days of old. Look how you're still fighting and trying to sue the government, sue the state, because you can't open your doors and infect who you want to infect and infest even further. Listen, you can fight and claim you won against the state. Silly, you didn't win against the state. Remember how the children of Israel fought for a king? And then God said, okay, because you want to be like the other nations. Listen, church, because you want to do like all of these other people who you say are of the world and don't believe in God, and they're trying to get back to their bars and their other stuff. Well, listen, church, you're asking for a Saul, and God has granted some of you your Saul. Now, remember how it went with God and Saul, according to your book line of the Bible. When it comes to Saul, it says, because you wanted a king like the other nations, I granted him to you. He says, but now when you get to the point of crying to me in regards to your king, I'm not even going to hear you. Well, when you start sucking up your last breath in your lungs from catching this coronavirus, listen, church, you deserved every bit of it. You got what you wanted. You always said throughout the years, be careful what you ask for. Well, there you go, church. Take a dose of your own medicine. God says the people are continuing to put forth effort to continue as they were. The people are not wanting to change. People are not interested in the change that I am bringing through this season. The people have persisted in their ways, God says. The people are not wanting the change that I am bringing, but it really does not matter. The normal that was, God says, will never be. Things will never return to normal. Things will never be normal. Things will never get back to normal. No one will return to the normal that used to be. No one will go back to business as usual. The days of business as usual are clearly over. That's what God says. The days of business as usual are clearly over. He says it really does not matter what the people think. It does not matter what the people believe, whether or not this is how it's going to be. He says what the people both think and believe does not change what will be. The people's opinions will not affect what will be. Your opinion as to what God spoke to me, your opinion of what you feel regarding all of this here, your opinion regarding this pandemic period and regarding the state of the church, it really does not affect what will be. What will be is going to be whether the people accept it or not, whether they want it or not. So it really does not matter. God says humility is going to be required in this season. Of course, the church won't do it. The church won't do it. The church has not submitted to the humility that's necessary during this season. The church feels humiliated, but the church doesn't understand the relationship between the humiliation and humility. God says humility is a must for this season. Well, church, that's one reason why you can't stay on the scene. Why? Because you don't have the humility. You're still bucking and prideful as you've always been. And then you're still running after a president who's as prideful as Nebuchadnezzar at the least. And yet you all keep referring to, and all of you ignorant followers, you keep referring to him as a King Cyrus. Just because King Cyrus let Nehemiah go back to the wall? You have no proof at all if he was even one of your followers, as you want to say. But yet you say Donald Trump is a follower of God. In what manner? In what manner? Humility is a must for this season. This season is meant to bring forth humility. Humility is what is going to get you through this season, God says. Without humility, you will lose in this season. Well, church, you've already lost. If humility is what is needed, the ingredient that is needed for success in this season, to win in this season, well, church, you've already lost. You might as well pack your bags and go on home. Go on to the great white north. Remember that song in the 70s? I grew up in South Florida and we had a mixture of genres, and it was take off to the great white north. Well, there you go, church. Just take on off to the great white north. Because God says your humility is a must, and you, church, are one prideful church. Even in the book of Jeremiah, even during the time of Jesus, the church, the pridefulness of the church. I remember when God spoke one of these messages to me, and I want to say it was in March, but God says, oh, the pride of the people, the pride of the church. People who humble themselves will be preserved. Well, church, you've yet to humble yourself. You will not be preserved. People who submit to the movement of this season will do good. People who submit to the rulings of this season, they'll fare well. But those who rebel against this season, there you go, church, will not recover from this season. Church, you cannot go beyond the borders of this season. You must come to an end. You will never recover, church. You will never recover from this. Those of you who can, you need to escape with your very life and go on with your life. Get with the program of God and keep trucking. Keep moving. Notice I'm not like the church saying, follow me. I'm not saying follow me. I'm saying follow whatever direction the move of God is going in this season. Follow the direction and leading of God, not of the church. The church is blind. The Bible says, how can a blind man lead another blind man out of the ditch or down the road or wherever he needs to go? How can they do it without both of them ending up in the ditch? Do not end up in the ditch, people, because of the church. The church is blinded. The church is walking around with blindfolds on. The church is voting in blindness. The church is voting in their humanity. The church is voting in their systemic racism. Stop following the church, church. Folks, stop following the church. Let that alone. Stop trying to gravitate to the title of the church. I believe that's part of something that was sold to us and we believed it. I really do, because everything that if it was not, then why would God be bringing it to an end? The church is a tore up. I know those of you who you're just stuck on your religious jargon. Again, why don't you get conscious of where these words came from and how the Bible was even interpreted and how it even came about and why it came about. And you'll come to understand that all of these petty words that you're holding on to as though they are the writ words of God, the very spoken, spittered words of God, they're not. As long as you stay in your ignorance. There's a verse in the Bible that says, for they being willful ignorance. Why would you will yourself to remain ignorant even when you hear the truth coming forth? People, shake yourselves and wake up. If nothing else, ask God to show you. Ask God to open your eyes if what you're hearing through me or others is correct. Ask God to show it to you and then believe that he is showing it to you and then embrace what he's showing to you. Those who rebel against the flow, God says, will be trampled by the flow. That's why the flow of this season is going to run right across the church. God says there will be many who will go against the flow of this season. The church is many. God says, remember, many. It says, wide is the gate that leads to destruction, the pathway, the flow that leads into a destructive end. He says, and there will be many that will go in that direction. In this, God said to me, there will be many who will go against the flow of this season and never recover. People, if you want your family to recover, if you want personal recovery in this season, beyond this season, listen, go with the flow of what God is doing in this season. Get out of those church houses, and get yourself a life with God. Get yourself some revelation with God and keep your ear to the door of your household, to the door of your heart, and listen to your spirit and listen to what God is saying to you. Listen to where God is leading you, people. Stop following man. Stop following the blind dictates of man. The church is full of man. The church is full of its own systemic issues, its own systemic racism, its own systemic greed, its own systemic pride, its own systemic religiosity. Get out of it while you can. God says those who snark, snarl, laugh, mock at the flow of this season. Look at what they're wearing. Look at the mask they have on. Look at them with gloves. Look at them they're so scared to touch everything. They're so scared to touch that shopping cart with their bare hands. They're so scared to touch that doorknob. They're so scared to get around people. They're still so scared for us to walk through them. They're so scared to come to some of these rallies and whatever else. They're so scared. You're mocking it, huh? Oh, I'm above the virus. Oh, I'm untouchable to the virus. God says those who snark at the flow of this season will succumb to the flow. Just look around at what's happening to people who snarling. Look at the White House. Look at the church house. Look at them, people. Look at them. God says there will be many who will succumb to the flow of this season. He says your recovery in this season is in going with the flow of this season. God says your recovery in this season is in going with the flow of this season. He says going with the flow of this season assures your recovery from this season. You got to go with the flow of this season in order to recover from this season. July the 2nd, 2020 is when God spoke the second message to me on the same day in the same morning. This is amazing. I remember this very, very well. God says the church is continuing to do the things that has gotten them to this point. He said the church, despite what is going on, despite what is happening in the world, despite the pandemic, the church is continuing to bulldoze themselves through all the warnings and all the things that are clear to see, all the speaking, all the whatever, all the doctors and the scientists and all, they're just continuing to go about the things that they've always gone about doing that got them to this point right here, this tore up, messed up, wretched point. Oh, wretched church that you are, who shall deliver you? Definitely not God in this season. The church is continuing to go along the path that will lead to their destruction, God says. The church is continuing to go along the path that will lead to their destruction. God says the church is already returning to their places of worship. In other words, when this thing, and as this thing began to lift up a little bit and people began to see a little beacon of light, everybody wanted to go back to their old way of living. He said the church is already returning to their places of worship. Now, I like what the Church of God in Christ did. They lost so many bishops and pastors that they got smart quick. The bishop of Church of God in Christ out there in Los Angeles, West Angeles church, they quickly put out a message, or he quickly put out a message and said, go home. God is doing something here. Go home. Go home. But many did not go home, and so now they've gone home, wherever their eternal home is. The church is already returning to their places of worship, God said. He says the church has already begun to return to their places of vomiting. God says the church has already returned to the place where they last vomited. He literally said that. The next line here says the church is returning to the places where they last vomited. You know how a dog returns to his vomit? If you've ever owned a dog for any lengthy period of time and paid attention to him or her, that dog will vomit up something and then immediately eat it right back. It'll make you sick to the stomach yourself. It's just like, and I let that dog lick me on my lips. I kiss that dog on his mouth, and look what he or she did. It's the worst thing. God says the church is returning to its last place of vomit. We got to get back to the church house because I got that meal still on the floor at the church house. The last place where I vomited up what I took in the church house. I can't let it go to waste. I got to go back and lick it back up. You got cleaned up and everything, but you want to go back to your old vomit. God says the church is going back to its own vomit. The church is returning to its own vomit. The church is returning to its own regurgitated vomit. We just keep regurgitating our own vomit and the vomit of others, and we just keep swapping mouths with it. Terrible. God says the church has returned to its own regurgitated state. But the regurgitated state of the church will not be, God says. He says the church will not continue in its regurgitated state. He said the church will not continue to feed upon its own gurgitation, nor will it continue to feed others from its gurgitations or its regurgitations. The church is full of people who feed off the gurgitations of others And then they feed off of their own regurgitations, and then they feed even others more of their regurgitated teachings, beliefs, infections. God says this is not the revival of the church. Ooh, there's a great revival going on. God said this is not the revival of the church. The church is not going to be revived. God says this season is not for the revival of the church. Oh, God's going to have a great awakening and we're going to win so many souls. What kind of souls are you going to win? So what are you going to do with them when you win them? Are you going to scare them up and fleece them and rape them and do whatever you want to do with them as well? Is that what you're going to do? Are you going to rape their minds? Are you going to rape their pockets? What are you going to do? You're going to rape them of their talents? What are you going to do with them? Nothing. You're going to make them, the Bible says, you're going to make them twice the sons of hell as yourself. And then the Bible talks about now the current state is worse than the last state. They were better off not even knowing you than have come into knowing you. And now they're worse off now than they ever were before. That's the story of many people who's gone into these church houses of whoredom of every type. This is not the church's revival, God says. God is not reviving the church. Those of you who think that God is reviving the church so that you can rob and rape all these other people, a whole new slew of people after all of this here. The pandemic is robbing and raping enough. You think God is going to let you, church, come and plunder these innocent souls further? You unrepentant, wretched individuals. There will be some, God says, in the church who will revive. But this is not about the church's revival. It sounds like God is saying there's going to be some within the church who are going to catch themselves and see themselves, and they're going to be revived to a state of, I don't know, a state of purity or whatever. I'll leave that where it's at. But he says this is not about the church's revival. He said this is not so that the church will be revived. He said the church is not to be revived. If you think that the church is to be revived after all of this, you're on crack. And look, I need a quick turnover myself. I got some more to sell you. Come see me. The church is not to be brought back, God says. You know how some people leave a note. If I have to be resuscitated, I don't want to be. If I have to be on life support, I don't want to be here. I'm writing this and signing this with my name, with my signature, so that you will know if you ever have to come back to me and do life-saving revival method, I don't want you to. Listen, God has already written and signed it before time that this is the time in time. This is the dispensation in time where the church ends and where the church is not to be revived. God says the church is not to be brought back. People who are claiming, God says, the church's revival are being misled. People who are claiming the church's return are misleading. He says there will be no resurgence of the church. The church will not resurge. The church will not return to its original state. The original state of the church will no longer be. The church will not see a return in its numeric proportions. There will not be a great inflow of the church. The church will not see a great inflow. This is not about the church receiving a great influx of people. The church will instead see a great outflow. He says the church will see an outflow of unprecedented numbers. He says the people will refuse to return to the church. He says the people will refuse to hear the church. The people will not hear what the church is singing. Listen, church, you have sat here and you have peed on the heads of your members, of your followers. Yes, I said peed. That's natural fluid. You peed on the head of your followers. You peed on the head of blacks. You peed on the heads of those who were dealing with real systemic issues throughout society, throughout the church world, throughout the world itself. And you peed on their heads and you told them that this is lemonade. No, it is not lemonade. The people understand that lemonade is not warm. The people understand that lemonade is not dark yellow. The people understand what lemonade smells like and what pee smells like. Church, you have sold the people a lie, and the people are not buying it any longer. Church, you have used the people as far as you're going to be able to use them. Church, you cannot be left to abuse the people any longer. God says the church will see an outflow of unprecedented numbers. The people will refuse to return to the church. The people will refuse to hear the church. The people will not hear what the church is saying. People will lose their appetite for the cravings they have for the church, or that they had for the church. People will no longer feed on the regurgitations of the church, God says. People will no longer crave for the regurgitations of the church. He says the church will no longer feed the people's cravings. People will be craving, but you won't be able to feed that craving with your junk any longer. God says the cravings of the people will be greater than the church can deliver. You won't be able to give them enough of your junk to appease that craving. The church will fail to deliver on the cravings of the people. The church will not succeed in delivering to the cravings of the people. God says there will be a great exposure within the church. I am waiting on this to occur. A great exposure within the church. What is going to happen? Well, Kenneth Copeland, I'm glad you're exposed now. Creflo, I want to believe something more, brother. I do, Creflo. I do. Yes, I do. But, I don't know, Creflo. I don't see it. I don't see it right now. Tony Evans, I want to believe. You keep saying vote the Bible way. That's how we got in this mess we in now. Voting the Bible way. How about vote the way of your personal conviction in relation to your relationship with God, which cannot be dictated to by man? How about that? See, that book is what got us so monked up now. Yes, God uses some things in that book, and there are hidden principles in that book behind the wordings, but you all are so stuck in the wordings of it that you're preaching your own agenda, the agenda of the original systemic issues, the systemic race and racism of the book, of those who brought forth the book, of those and their reasons for bringing forth the book, because it was not to save a people. That was not what they brought that book forth in 1609 in England. You know it. I know it. And history knows it. Cut it out. The exposure of the church, God says, will be great. The systems of the church will be exposed. The church systems are going to be exposed. There will be a great exposure of church leaders. God, I am waiting on this to occur. Jefferson Franklin, shame on you. Franklin Graham, shame on you. If only you were like your daddy. Even your daddy, from what I'm being told, even your daddy, from what I've heard Carlton Pearson say, he was being converted. He himself was evolving, but you all kept him on hush so that he wouldn't mess up your sacred cow, your sacred money flow. Those of you at Liberty University, shame on you. Shame to the shame on you. God says church leaders are going to be going to receive great exposure. The highest levels, God said, of church leaders will be exposed. The exposure within the church will reach the highest levels. Bill Winston, shame on you. But you're too wretched to even realize it. Rodriguez, shame on you. Jesse, I can only imagine. Shame on you. And those dry jokes of yours don't get no play. You 80 years old, if not better, and you sitting up here always want to act like you some kind of thug, like you belong to the mafia. Man, come on. It makes people laugh because the church is full of dull, stale people, just dead bodies. So they'll laugh at anything. Simon Says. You're with a bunch of Simon Says. The entity of the church itself is corrupt to its core. The entity of the church itself is corrupt to its core. That's what God says. The entity of the church itself is corrupt to its core. He says the church is corrupt to its very core. The church, he says, has always been corrupt. The church has always been a place of corruption. He says the corruption of the church is not a new conception, but rather the church's corruption has always been. The corruption of the church is nothing new, God says. The origin of the church itself is of a corrupt nature. He says the basic foundational layers of the church's foundation are of a corrupt nature. He says the corruption of the church is only being brought forth. It's not coming into existence. It's just only being brought forth for what it has always been. He says the church's corruption is merely being exposed. People are merely being exposed for who they are, for who they truly are. He says you will see a great number of people within the church who will become sickened by the diseases of the virus, disease, and the disease is of the virus, and will succumb to the diseases of the virus. God says you will see many people in the church. Of course, we've seen that, but apparently there's going to be a greater scene of this here, apparently, that are going to be sickened by this disease, and they will succumb to this disease. Now, I heard that even just recently, maybe a month ago, that even Bishop Ellis, and listen, that he contracted the virus. They claim, but the church lies so much, it's a shame, that he was touched by the virus. I heard that the Winings were touched. Several of them were touched by the virus as well. I don't know how deep all of this goes, but church, you have always hidden the sickness and deaths of your people, and you've always covered, and then use the verse, love covers a multitude of sin. A friend, he'll cover. No, a friend will expose your mess when you ain't trying to get it right. Jesus is a friend. Okay. Who sticks closer than a brother. So if God is exposing you, then your friend exposes you. Okay. Stop all this. Your friend covers you. No, your bribe, a friend who can be bought covers you. Like you, church, covering Donald Trump. You know you would never license somebody into ministry tricking like Donald Trump. You know that. Yet you cover him. You give him a bribe, and he gives you what you want with Israel. Get off of it, church. You're exposed. Pow. You will see this begin to occur. God says you will begin to see these diseases and these sicknesses and diseases of the virus that will cause members of the church to be succumb to it. He said great numbers of people. I believe he's talking church people here. Well, that was the vein he was in with me. Greater numbers. That's what he said. Greater numbers of people will fade away. Greater numbers of people within the church world, there it is, will fade away because of their return to their own vomit. God says there must be a distinction. There must be a distinction between those who live in accordance with the virus and those who do not. He says there must be a distinction between those who are listening to the advice of the medical authorities and those who are not. He says the distinction will be clearly set and seen, and it's happening now. The distinction will be clearly recognized. Listen, let me say this here again. I think I said it, but I'm not sure, but I want to make sure that I cover this here. Understand this here. Just because you're a pastor, just because you're a prophet, just because you're an apostle, just because you're a bishop, just because you're whoever you are, understand this here. Your authority does not supersede the type season that you're in this pandemic. In this pandemic season, it doesn't matter whether you're a president or vice president of a country or whatever else. It doesn't matter if you're the boss, the owner, you own the bar, you own the club, you own this, you own that. It does not matter. What matters is, and what you should be adhering to, are those who are in charge in relation to this season. This is not a season where police officers are in charge. No, doctors and scientists are in charge of this season. They've studied and learned and been ordained by God to lead in this season. A pastor is not in charge of this season. Pastor, why don't you get off of your pride? Why don't you apostles and you bishops get off your pride and stop leading people into the church house? Stop leading people into the slaughterhouse. Now, I'm going to say some things on that in the next recording. Watch what God showed me. You're going to be messed up over it, and that'll be good for you. Listen, why don't you stop trying to take leadership? You're so stuck in your pride. You're so stuck in your authority. You're so stuck in your collars and your positions. Why don't you sit your little happy tasses down? I wanted to say, but I said your happy tasses down. Why don't you sit down and let the medical officials who are the authorities in this hour, in this season, why don't you let the scientists do what they have been ordained to do? The church, you have always usurped your authority. You have always shut out the mouths and voices of those who matter, the mouths and voices of those who are speaking louder than you and speaking more substance than you. And when you can't control them, you shut them up and you shut them out. Shut up and sit down somewhere and let the medical and scientific authorities of this hour speak forth to help the people. And those of you people who you have your television and you have your news feed and all, stop listening to these preachers. They're only in it for themselves. They don't care if you die. Don't you see the very man that they're putting in office doesn't care if you die either? They're all selling you a lie. Look at the writing on the wall. They don't care about you. Care about yourself. Stop being so stupid, man. If you got a family, step up and step into place as the man of your house. Woman, if your husband is silly, you step up and stand forth for the people of your house as the woman of your house. One of y'all get a backbone and stand up for yourself. You grown men sucking up to the church, shame on your soft selves. You grown men sucking up to a president. You politicians sucking up to that man like he's daddy, like he's big daddy, like he's like sugar daddy, like he's your pimp, he's your boss, he's your daddy. Who's your daddy? Donald Trump. To hell with that. He was always too weak to really be a part of the mafia. He was probably getting pimped out himself by the mafia. Why? Because, for the most part in that New York area and stuff, you had to give underhanded payments and all to the mafia and all. Him and Giuliani. You don't know what kind of connections they have with all of that. Listen, he's nothing but a puppet. He was called by God for this hour. Yes, he was. I agree with that 100%. However, he was not called for the reasons that the church is saying he's called, and for why the church is pushing him forth for another season, for another term. Nebuchadnezzar was called by God to plunder the children of Israel. But then God did say, "Oh, Babylon, who did tell you to do this here?" Yet at the same time, you find verses in the Bible where God says, "And I will send one from Babylon. I will send one from the north. I will send forth. He will be my tool, my instrument. Yet at the same time, he said, who told you, Babylon? Who told you? Donald, your who told you moment is upon you, boy. Your who told you, church, your who told you moment is upon you, even though God used you. I had a message one time, never got to speak on it, not in an open forum, but just because God uses you, I'm going to leave it at that. All right. The distinction will be clearly seen and set in this season, God says. The distinction will be clearly recognized. He says, look, people will have great consequences to their actions during this season. Again, people will have great consequences to their actions during this season. He says the consequences during this season will be great. The consequences that people will suffer due to their own activity and even their own inactivity during this season will be great. In other words, it will not be cheap what you will pay for going in the direction that you so willfully desire to go. God says those who go with the flow of this season will get through this season if you go with the flow. Those who adhere to the advice of this season will be spared in this season. But now understand that that advice has to come from the source that God has, the source that is speaking substance, correct substance for the hour. But those who continue to do what they are so pleased to do during this season will see devastating consequences. Devastating. Okay, we're going to pull from here and we will go from here. Even if I hit this here once before, what we just came out of, I had to do it this way because I wanted to clear some things up. But anyway, let's keep moving. Let's go into another one, and I will see you on the next one. Thank you.